I wanted to take a brief break from the usual military history and dive into something a little more current, the Army's 250th birthday parade. At first, I wasn't going to weigh in on this, but after seeing all the wild takes flying around on both sides, I kind of felt like I had to. So, let me just be very clear right up front. This is not a political commentary. It has nothing to do with who was in the White House or standing in the reviewing stand. Instead, I'm speaking here as a 10-year Army veteran and a former staff sergeant, not some sort of political pundit. My only agenda is the same one that I had during my time in uniform, and I'll front-load that right here. That agenda is taking care of soldiers, preparing them for war, and guarding the standards that keep them alive. So today, we're going to talk about what actually happened at that parade, what went wrong, why it matters, and how the Army can fix it and move forward from here. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. First off, I want to say that not every formation involved was bad. The Old Guard is, well, they're the Old Guard, and they looked sharp as always. There were also regular Army formations that were just fine. For example, these soldiers in Gulf War uniforms are marching in the same cadence, in step, and look overall pretty sharp. But unfortunately, for every acceptable formation, there was a formation that was a complete soup sandwich, or a football bat is my personal favorite term. This photo is just one out of many. You can see here that the ranks are poorly dressed with this very notable S-curve, soldiers are out of step, and more pertinently, there are at least 5 different cadences or rhythms on display in this one formation. To be honest, it's much closer to a stroll through the mall than a march in front of the nation. Even one formation like this in a nationally broadcasted parade is one too many. And beyond that, the vehicles were also an absolute disaster. Many vehicle commanders do what this commander does, a quick 1-second salute to the reviewing stand, and then goes back to waving and looking all over the place. It's so common that I don't think the vehicle commanders were briefed on how to properly pass in review. Now, with those issues out of the way, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on what went wrong with the marching and how you would go about fixing that. That's not really the point of this video. I'm looking more at the big picture. If you do want me to break down the marching, put it in the comments section below. But in terms of the marching, there are people coming up with all sorts of reasons to try to explain why so many formations looked so bad. This gentleman here is obviously pushing an agenda, and I'll leave his post on screen so you can read it. But this shows a total lack of understanding regarding the military. First of all, a job in the Army isn't some narrow definition. In my 10 years in the Army, I spent more time as a mechanic, janitor, and landscaper than I did doing reconnaissance. Soldiering isn't Burger King. You don't get to have it your way. Your job is whatever mission the Army gives you, whether that's snatching an HVT or marching in a parade. And besides, marching is a basic skill, something every soldier should know, no matter their MOS. Soldiers might march for payday activities, a change of command, or simply because they are ordered to by a superior. My point here is that in the Army, and really in any professional military organization, your job isn't your narrow personal definition of it. Rather, your job is giving 110% to whatever mission the military gives you. Also, we can look at this parade here. This is the 82nd Airborne Division parading through New York City after returning from World War II. They're certainly not just quote-unquote ceremonial soldiers. These men were some of the most battle-hardened veterans that we've ever welcomed home, and they still parade sharply. So we can pretty much discard posts like this out of hand, whether they come from somebody with his agenda or an agenda on the other side of the political divide. A better take comes from Charlotte Clymer. I hope I pronounced her name right, but she does have a background as a former member of the Old Guard, which is the Army's ceremonial regiment, and they generally do a very good job of ceremonial duties. As I just got done saying, in the Army, we don't usually control our mission, but we do control the amount of professionalism and pride that we put into accomplishing that mission. I also agree that soldiers perform best when they are motivated and when they are consistently held to high standards. Moreover, I agree that the soldiers should have been aware of the high profile of the event and been held at least to a minimal standard, if not a much higher than normal standard. One thing that I would add on is that marching is certainly a perishable skill. I think that maybe being in the Old Guard, she thinks it's a little bit more common than it is across the rest of the Army. However, with that being said, On being briefed that they were participating in a nationally televised parade, the NCOs involved in these units should have designated time to refresh and retrain their soldiers on that perishable skill. This is the basic core job of the professional NCO: receive, plan for, prepare, and accomplish the mission. What Clymer says next is pertinent. She attributes the poor marching to the soldiers being tired, annoyed, and unhappy because their quarters and food were not great when they were being lodged in DC. That might be true, but I'd be alarmed if the NCOs were allowing this. Another core part of the NCO's job is to maintain and model the very highest standards for lower enlisted soldiers, even under the most adverse conditions. This is enshrined in the first line of the NCO Creed. Besides, in combat, it's not as if we get put up in the Four Seasons and fed gourmet meals. I spent about a month eating nothing but MREs and water, sleeping on a rooftop, and as an NCO, I still held my soldiers to a high standard and did everything I could to keep them laser focused on the mission. The alternative to all these different theories, and the one that I believe is the case, is that some NCOs have become complacent. They've stopped demanding attention to detail and discipline. They've forgotten that excellence in small things is necessary for excellence in big things. In other words, they have slipped and forgotten how to be NCOs. And this is concerning because the NCO Corps is the backbone of the Army, the ones responsible for setting the tone and the standard. If NCOs don't do their job, then there is no standard. Now, some of you might be saying that I'm overreacting, that a parade has nothing to do with combat. That's a common misconception even amongst some professional military personnel. The truth is that drill and ceremony is inextricably linked to the profession of arms, all the way from Caesar's 10th Legion to Napoleon's Imperial Guard to the modern battlefield. Drill reinforces critical concepts such as attention to detail, tight control over your body, unity of movement, and discipline. These are all traits that are critical to the modern soldier. For example, imagine being on a STAC team preparing to enter a building with enemies inside. If the guy behind you steps off on the wrong foot, he could easily step on your heel, causing you to trip or even fall. Most certainly, it could throw your aim off and give your enemy a split second of advantage. Attention to detail is always important, whether it's paying attention to the cadence or making sure you're inputting the right grid coordinates into the fire control computer. And discipline is the hallmark of successful militaries from the start of recorded history. Whether it's discipline in keeping your head and eyes to the front, or discipline in scanning your sector on patrol, the core fundamentals are the exact same. Moreover, the basic movements in the parade are the low end of the crawl phase in the crawl, walk, run training methodology. If you can't execute very basic drill movements in front of a friendly crowd, then how can we expect you to execute complex maneuvers under enemy fire? Simply put, we can't. It's not a realistic expectation. And this is why it matters. Lack of discipline and lack of attention to detail will get soldiers killed needlessly in battle, and needless deaths are unacceptable. You see, in combat there are variables that we can't control. We can't control what the enemy does, we can't control the weather, but we can control how our soldiers are trained, their level of discipline, their situational awareness, and attention to detail. And these are the things that we need to focus on in order to eliminate those needless casualties. And at the end of the day, this speaks to the single most important job for a non-commissioned officer: taking care of soldiers. You can't take care of your soldiers if you aren't hammering discipline and attention to detail into everything they do. If these leaders absorb these lessons, then this parade could be a good thing. It should be the wake-up call we need to snap us back into laser focus and strict discipline, traits that every successful military needs. It would give us the time to refocus on these priorities and these fundamental principles before the bullets start flying. And that's what I sincerely hope happens, because ultimately, my concern is about the next generation of America's soldiers being ready to encounter the most lethal battlefield in military history. With that said, I'd love to hear what you think about the parade. Do you believe that the poor drill is a sign of underlying issues with discipline and attention to detail? And do you think those things still matter in modern warfare? Let me know in the comments section below, and as always, thank you for watching and take care until the next time.